A routine bus ride takes an unexpected turn when a group of overconfident teenagers chooses the wrong target. A carefree Vietnam veteran with a past far beyond what they could ever imagine. With a sigh of compressed air, the bus came to a stop at the corner of Market Avenue and Elm Street. Its doors creaked open, inviting a weary procession of passengers to board. Among them was an elderly black man, his movements slow but deliberate. Each step carried the weight of a life well lived. A wooden cane, its surface smoothed by years of use, supported him as he held a modest bag of groceries in his other hand. Unhurried but firm, he made his way to the back of the bus, settling into a seat and resting his cane against his knee. The evening sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on his weathered face, tracing the deep lines that spoke of hardships overcome and wisdom gained. He sat in silence, largely unnoticed, except for the curious gaze of a child or the faint smile of a kind stranger. The bus roared to life again, its engine letting out a low growl as it weaved through the bustling streets. Inside, the familiar symphony of sounds blended together. The murmur of conversations, the shuffle of feet, the occasional chime of a phone. Amidst it all, the elderly man remained still, a quiet observer of the world outside, his eyes filled with untold stories. But not everyone recognized the dignity in his silence. Not everyone understood the depth of his presence. And soon, that ignorance would lead to an unforgettable lesson. As the bus neared the next stop, the atmosphere shifted. The brakes screeched, the doors opened, and a surge of energy flooded the interior. 4 teenagers climbed aboard, their loud, unrestrained laughter tinged with mischief. Each carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, their voices cutting through the air like static. They lingered at the front, scanning the passengers in search of entertainment. One of them, a tall boy with a backward baseball cap, nudged his friend and pointed toward the elderly man. "Hey, look at him," he murmured, loud enough for the others to hear. They exchanged amused glances, their chuckles growing as they sauntered down the aisle. Some passengers tensed in their seats, sensing trouble. Others pretended not to notice. The teenagers stopped just a few steps from the old man, their postures exaggerated, their confidence overflowing. "Hey, old man," the boy in the cap said, leaning against the seat in front of him. "Did you get lost on your way back to the nursing home or what?" The elderly man didn't react. His gaze remained fixed on the window, his hands resting on his cane as if it were an extension of himself. His silence only fueled their amusement. Another teen, shorter and wearing a hoodie, smirked. "That cane for walking? Or is it the only thing keeping you upright?" Their laughter erupted once again. Around them, the bus seemed to hold its breath. A woman near the front clutched her purse a little tighter. A man in a suit adjusted his tie, eyes glued to his phone. The unspoken rule was clear. Silence was safer. But silence wasn't enough for these boys. They stepped closer, their voices rising, their taunts becoming bolder. "I bet he's got some cash," one murmured. "What's in the bag, old man? Cat food?" Just as their mockery peaked, the old man moved. For the first time, he lifted his head, not with anger or fear, but with an unreadable calm. Something in his posture shifted, and for a fleeting moment the teenagers hesitated. But the pause was brief. Seeing no immediate resistance, the boy in the cap leaned in closer, his grin widening. "What's wrong, old man? Cat got your tongue?" The hoodie-wearing teen nudged the cane with his foot, testing boundaries. Their laughter rang through the bus, sharp, grating. The old man's grip on his cane remained steady. Finally, he turned to look at them. His eyes did not hold anger. They did not hold fear. They were steady, piercing, unwavering. The bus seemed to shrink. The air thickened with an unspoken tension. young woman clenched her purse tighter, her knuckles pale. A middle-aged man cleared his throat but said nothing. No one moved. No one intervened. The boy in the hoodie frowned, refusing to back down. "Are you deaf or what? Maybe you don't even speak Spanish," he sneered. But the joke fell flat. The laughter wavered. The old man straightened slightly, his posture shifting. His cane now rested firmly on the floor, carrying the weight of something unspoken. A flicker of doubt crossed the smallest teen's face. "Maybe we should chill," he murmured. But his suggestion went ignored. "You got a problem, old man," the boy in the cap pressed, irritation creeping into his voice. "We're just messing around. Relax." For the first time, the old man spoke. His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable weight. "Do you always find fun in bothering strangers?" The question hung in the air, devoid of anger, devoid of sarcasm, just a quiet clarity demanding an answer. The boy in the hoodie scoffed, though his bravado was slipping. The old man tilted his head. "Because I've met boys like you before," he said, voice measured. "It was another time, another place. They didn't laugh as much when they learned what real fear was." The air changed. The laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. The teens exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly shaken. But the boy in the cap refused to back down. "What? You gonna scare us with your cane?" he scoffed, voice louder now, forced. The bus jolted around a corner, causing the hoodie-wearing teen to stumble. He grabbed a pole for balance. The old man, however, remained perfectly still, his cane an anchor. Then, for the first time, he lifted it. His voice was calm but carried a weight that could not be ignored. "You think this cane is what keeps me standing?" he asked. Then he shook his head. "No, boys. This cane is just something I use. What really keeps me standing is something much stronger." The boy in the cap scoffed again, but this time his laughter was empty. "Yeah, and what's that?" he challenged, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The old man took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the group. "When I was your age," he began, "I carried something much heavier than a cane. I carried a rifle, through the jungles, halfway across the world. I was 19, just a little older than you." Then he said it. The word fell like a sudden drop in temperature. Vietnam. The confined space of the bus seemed to absorb the word, silencing even the faintest whispers. The story continues with the weight of wisdom, regret, and an unforgettable lesson. The elderly man's voice remained steady, but it carried the weight of memories long buried. "We didn't have time for jokes like yours back then," he continued. "We had to grow up fast, too fast. Some of us never made it home, and those who did," he paused, his fingers tightening around his cane. "We carried more than just our gear. We carried scars. Some you can see, most you can't." The smallest teen shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. Even the boy in the hoodie had lost his smirk, his confidence eroding under the old man's words. The old man leaned forward slightly. "You want to know what fear is?" he asked. A thick silence filled the bus, stretching between them. "Fear isn't being teased on a bus," he said. "It's the sound of a twig snapping behind you when you don't know if it's an enemy or a trap. Fear is watching your friend fall and knowing you can't stop to help." For a moment his voice wavered, but then it steadied again. "And you know what else I carried?" He fixed his gaze on the boy in the cap. "Discipline, respect, and the understanding that real strength isn't about putting others down. It's about knowing when to stand tall and when to stay silent." The bus was completely still. Some passengers wiped their eyes. Others stared out the window, pretending not to listen. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was heavy, real. The boy in the hoodie swallowed hard before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to disrespect you, man." The old man nodded, his expression softening slightly, as he leaned back into his seat, resting his cane against his knee once more. A thoughtful silence settled over the bus. It wasn't empty, it was reflective, the kind of silence that lingers long after a moment has passed. The teenagers stood awkwardly in the aisle, their bravado stripped away. The other passengers, once passive onlookers, stole quiet glances at the old man, their expressions a mix of admiration and guilt. The boy in the cap, the ringleader of their taunts, glanced down at his sneakers. He shifted uncomfortably. His earlier confidence was now just a memory. "Look, we were just messing around," he muttered, voice lower, almost remorseful. The old man's gaze softened, but his posture remained firm. "Messing around can get you into trouble," he said gently. "Sometimes, trouble you can't get out of. I've seen it happen too many times." The boy in the hoodie hesitated before speaking again, his voice quieter than before. "Did you lose people over there?" The old man's expression turned distant, as if looking into a past no one else could see. He nodded slowly. "More than I'd like to count," he admitted. "Good men, brave men, and not just in the war. Some came home, but they never really left the fight." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You'd be surprised how fragile strength can be when it's tested the wrong way." The weight of his words settled over the bus, thick and unbreakable. Even the quietest of the group finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "We didn't mean to disrespect you." The old man gave a slow nod, the lines on his face softening. "Respect isn't just in words," he said. "It's in how you act. Remember that." For a moment, time seemed to pause. The entire bus held its breath. Then, from the front, a woman spoke, her voice firm yet kind. "You boys should be grateful," she said. "You just got a lesson most people never get to hear." Her words broke the silence. The teenagers glanced around, seeing the nods of agreement from the other passengers. Slowly, they moved toward the front, murmuring quiet apologies as they passed the old man. At the next stop, the group got off. Their laughter, their arrogance, the bravado they had boarded with stayed behind. The doors closed behind them and the old man leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window. The silence that filled the bus now was different. It wasn't tense, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something deeper, something reverent. Passengers murmured among themselves, some sharing stories of family members who had served, others simply sitting in quiet admiration of the man who had faced down those boys with nothing but steady resolve. But through the whispers and the glances, the old man remained as he had been before, calm, quiet, and deeply rooted in a strength that had carried him through much more than just this simple bus ride. As the bus neared its final stops, the atmosphere had changed. The tension and avoidance were gone. In their place was something unspoken, a shared moment of reflection. People looked at the old man differently now, not just as someone who had endured hardships, but as a quiet force of wisdom and resilience. A young woman sitting across from him finally spoke, her voice soft but full of meaning. "Thank you for what you did, for what you've lived." The old man gave a small nod, his expression kind yet reserved. "I did what I had to do," he said simply. "That's all any of us can do. But what matters is what you do now, with the life you have, with the chances you're given." His words settled over the bus like a gentle weight, guiding everyone into quiet thought. The young woman offered a faint smile before turning her gaze back to the window. As the bus slowed at Main Street, the old man rose, his cane steady beneath him. The passengers instinctively moved aside, giving him space. He paused before stepping off, his gaze sweeping over the faces around him. "Be kind to each other," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen more than most could imagine. "You never know the battles someone is fighting." With that, he stepped onto the sidewalk, the doors closing behind him. For a moment, the passengers remained silent. Then, the engine rumbled back to life and the bus pulled away. For the rest of the ride, the people on board carried more than just their belongings. They carried a story, a reminder of strength found in humility, of the weight of words, of the importance of respect in a world that so often forgets its value. And maybe, just maybe, those teenagers walking home from the bus stop carried that lesson too, letting it shape the way they moved through the world.